One, this is David Snyder from Lit Protocol, and I am so delighted to be joined by Shahrukh, who is the product lead at Eco. Shahrukh, thanks for making the time to talk with us.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here.
Amazing. Well, for those of you who are listening, who are not familiar with your work, maybe you want to start with introducing yourself and what you're focused on.
Yeah, so Shahrukh, I work at Eco, and Eco is basically a stablecoin abstraction company. So at Eco, we built the fundamental technologies to enable stablecoin interoperability between chains, but also stablecoin fungibility between different stablecoin types, right? Like at Eco, we just think that it's so ridiculous that you have you have USDC and USDT and USDY and DAI and Plasma's USDC. And as you see more and more people get onboarded to stablecoins, everybody's incentivized to capture the tempting base treasury yield, right? Because the stablecoin model is really, really good because if your stablecoin is successful, it's an endless money machine, right? Like you mint the synthetic asset on chain and off chain, you can just diversify into like really safe treasury yields. And it's as a model that's works really well for the big entrants in stablecoin like Tether and Circle. And so we see like a huge opportunity where it's like the new gold rush and everybody's trying to get their shovel in, so to speak. But what it does is creates this fragmentation on chain where you have to reason about different dollar represented by different companies and try to explain to your grandma the difference between Tether and Circle. And that's basically we think that's the final mile for stablecoin payments to truly take off. We see it similar to the analogy of Visa. So you can imagine before Visa, right? Chase had their own Chase bank accounts and they had Chase bank dollars. And then JP Morgan had their own bank accounts and they had the JP Morgan deposits and balances you have in their accounts. But you weren't able to make those balances interoperable or use them in a unified payment system. And so that's the problem that Visa solved, basically taking all these fragmented balances across different banking institutions and trying to be able to make routing technologies between them. And we think there's a lot of analogies between that and what's happening today in stablecoin space in general.
And yes, and on with Eco specifically, and some of our collaboration and work together, which I'm sure we'll get into. Well, that's great. I mean, and obviously, like an exciting year, just from the political climate around stablecoins. Cool. And before we get into any kind of more product and technical details here, how about yourself? How did you first come to crypto, and what got you initially interested in the space?
Yeah, I feel like everybody in crypto has a really fun story of how they got in. My fun story has been I primarily got into crypto in university where my dad was like, you need to go get a job. I can't pay for all of this stuff because at the same time I was in university in Canada. I'm originally from Pakistan. So you had this interesting thing where the Pakistani currency started to inflate against the Canadian dollar. So all your university plans actually started shrinking as the inflation rate against the Canadian dollar started to get lower and lower. And so your runway started to get reduced. When I went to Canada, I had a 4-year run rate. I could do all my university. Everything was fine. 1.5 year in, Pakistan's currency is now double inflated against Canadian dollar, and my runway is cut in half. And my dad's having this conversation with me. I'm like, well, what do I do? What is a good thing that I can do? And I was always interested in crypto and blockchain in general, just from a theory perspective. But I got the opportunity to get exposed to it when I was actually trying to get a wire in to pay my university fees. And my wire kept getting rejected for some weird banking reason. And I'm trying to pay my university fee. And every time I send a Swift, wait 5 days, and then it rebounds, and then another 5 days, and then it comes back, and then I try again. I've been waiting 2 weeks for this wire. And someone said, hey, there's Bitcoin exchanges on both ends. You should just convert your money into Bitcoin, send the Bitcoin over, cash out. And I did it, and I got my money in an hour. I had money from Pakistan in Canada in an hour. And that for me flipped
Yeah.
the switch where I was like, this is useful. And so that's where I really started to get interested. What I focused on though is market making. So I saw that there was a lot of premiums between Bitcoin priced in Canadian dollars and Bitcoin priced in other currencies like Pakistani rupees. And so I started to market make the spread between them. So that got me through the university days. However, then I got impacted really deeply by Quadriga CX, which was the biggest exchange in Canada, actually rugging. So the founder left. There's a whole Netflix documentary about it. I'm one of those people. Most of my net worth was locked in there because I was running arbitrage, which is very capital intensive. And I had a really big, in the bear market was my true bear market where I was like, I've lost most of my net worth. What do I do? And I recovered from that experience. But what I took away from was that this system only works and is only going to be better if it's non-custodial. And I think that really made me obsess about recreating all the financial primitives we use in crypto, but in a non-custodial way with the same UX. And that started my whole journey in the technology, got me introduced to Eco, and now I'm here.
We've known each other for some time, but I've never asked you that question before. And that context puts a lot of things in place for me. I definitely look at the world through the same lens, which is like, that's the end game that we're all going for here. That's the sovereignty, is that the way that you use financial, like from a user's perspective, the way they use a financial interface and then the infrastructure that sits behind it, it's at exact parity, whether or not it is centralized or decentralized or custodial or non-custodial from the background. And so, yeah, I definitely share that view. And in the past couple of years, like pretty incredible progress. And I guess that brings me to my next question, which is, how did you first come across the work that we were up to at Lit Protocol?
Right, that's
Yeah.
a fun one as well. One thing I will say is like I share your perspective, like David, and I'm excited for the world where I think Google brought a world where they said don't be evil, but crypto is building a world that says can't be evil, and it's very subtle, but it's very powerful. So yeah, really excited for the world. How I got introduced to Lit was actually I was in a ETH Global
Right.
hackathon. Shout out to ETH Global, and I was in Waterloo, and I was like, I want to build a really fun, interesting project, and there was this really scrappy group of people from Lit team, and they had some pretty interesting tech. And I was like, I wonder what we can do with it. That was the first time I started to think about Lit in like a way to how to use the technology. I'd been familiar with Lit somewhat before that, but that's where I was like, okay, let me try to build something with it. And yeah, I think in large part, the technology you had, the docs were great, but also the team was so helpful in helping us stumble through the first iteration that I was hooked from day one. I was hooked as much on the technology as on the
That's what it
team.
takes. It's,
Yeah.
it's the full package for sure. And I remember what you built in that hackathon, which was it was a decentralized paymaster for smart accounts, which is for anybody listening, still an unbelievably huge opportunity that's just sitting there and lingering. I remember some of the conversations that we were having then around like, what would it look like to set up ad networks that sit on top of paymasters where you have to watch video pre-roll ads before having your gas subsidized and things of that nature. Like, all that world is still totally possible. Amazing.
Only possible, and code's open source. And if you're interested and you're watching this, reach out to any one of us and we'd be happy to dust that off and help you get this all across the line.
Absolutely. And so, maybe you can go into a little bit more of the stack that you're building out at Eco today, what you've built, where you've implemented Lit Protocol in the past, how you're thinking about using Lit ahead.
Yeah. So great question. So with Eco, as we said, we're working on stablecoin abstraction tech, right? So what we're approaching it from the bottoms up. So we're trying to create a vertically integrated solution all the way from smart contracts down to the services, a system that is hyper opinionated for stablecoins. And you might think like, why do this? Why not use something like a conventional AMM? It's because, again, the insight we have is USDC and USDT are not different assets. Underlying, they're the same, they're different wrappers. So with that constraint in mind, you can start to make some design assumptions that you just can't when you're dealing with like a swap between Bitcoin and ETH. And that's why we believe like a vertically integrated solution is just going to be better for pricing and for like overall UX. And we have proven that with like the early work we've done. So what we've built so far is the three verticals we like to call routes, crowd liquidity, and accounts. Routes is basically the settlement and routing layer. It's basically an intent bridge that allows you to move stablecoins really easily. It is the only one I know so far that is fully permissionless to deploy. It also uses permissionless settlement systems, which is modular. So you can pick and choose which settlement type you want, and it supports permissionless settlement systems. So you could just deploy these contracts on your own today and get intents out of the box. We also have an open source solver implementation that just crossed 630 million in volume. So it's an open source implementation. You can do it. It's done 500 million. It's free to use for you, and it works with Eco out of the box. So that's our toolkit, the base layer, to allow interoperability for everybody. Now, once you've built that intent layer, you also need a liquidity layer, because intents without liquidity is just a house without furniture. It's completely useless. And so that's where Lit comes in. So when we started to look at intent systems, we realized that the biggest choke point for intent systems are actually solvers. And the biggest choke point in running solvers is managing your own inventory. And actually, we've seen research in the space where if there's multiple solvers all competing for the same liquidity, you're actually going to get worst outcomes, because now you have created artificial demand more so than it exists, right? If everybody's competing to fulfill a $5 USDC order, that means, and if there's 5 solvers, that means there's demand of $5, but there's an artificial demand of 20 on top of it. And that's
Right.
not good. And so with the second product that we built, where Lit came in, we were like, what if you could run solvers that don't need liquidity? And the way we did that is we created a first fully uncollateralized cross-chain flash loan. So what we do is we have pools that exist on 2 chains, and then those pools are connected to Lit as cosigners. So there's a Lit programmable private key, and this Lit programmable private key has the ability to sign transactions, approving certain transactions for the pool. What we do at the Lit side is we have ossified a Lit action to be connected to those PKPs, and that Lit action does certain validity and safety checks. So some things that the Lit action does is, first of all, it checks the source chain to see if the intent is collateralized so that it can fulfill it. Second, it checks if the profitability is matching the pool parameters. And third, it checks like if the finality of the transaction is sufficient enough for it to actually sign, or whether it should wait. Once those 3 checks have passed, Lit will just give you a signature, and the solver can just use that signature to use our pool's liquidity to fulfill the intent. And then the pool itself also uses Lit to rebalance itself between the different chains. So Lit allows us to get a read of the overall state between multiple different blockchains, understand what rebalancing paths are available, and then approve transactions or generate transactions to rebalance the pools to bring them back so they can fulfill more intents.
I mean,
I'll
no,
stop
that's
here.
great. I mean, I think like it's just been very impressive to see what the Eco team has done with this. Because, we showed up to the picture with saying, hey, this is a generalized computer, and you can program it however you like for the purpose of generating signatures and encryption. And obviously, there's a lot to be said about the security and architecture of Lit that makes that possible. But what the Eco team has done around, and with your leadership, in seeing this as essentially like a coordinator for all types of stablecoins is really unique. And, we see a lot of like stablecoin interoperability products that either exist, whether it's, I believe from Tether UST Zero and Circle's Gateway, that are focused on single assets. From what I can tell, what's happening with Bridge and Tempo and Stripe, that's also focused on single asset liquidity across chains. And yeah, I think the vision behind this and the understanding of the insight that the dollar in the fiat bank account that is earning yield across all of these stablecoins that seem diverse, but really taking that insight seriously, that they are just in fact on-chain wrappers, which is the notion of any RWA or real world asset has enabled this thing that is really exciting. And I don't want to, I want to respect the types of things that you guys are announcing, but if you're able to share, can you share a little bit more around like why you call it crowd liquidity? What's the crowd element here?
Yeah, so the crowd liquidity element is up until so far, we've seen, and this is not something we feel good about, is intent yield so far has been captured by two entities. One being like professional market makers that have the infrastructure to take outside capital and also the technical proficiency to run intent solvers, right? It's a very small subset. It's less than 4 entities right now that can do this at scale. And I think 2 of them are winding down right now. So there's not a lot of entities that can just do this. Most of it's just projects that run their own solvers because there is just no one to solve for them. And this is because solving is so hard. So there's this one, and the intent yield mostly goes to them. Intent yield is also captured by a lot of exchanges, where exchanges, and this, not to take, this is a bit of a hot take, but exchanges use the same model as the banking system, where they get no cost of capital because they're just using users' deposits to give interoperability as a service and make a premium of that. So they take advantage of users being asset agnostic and chain agnostic when they deposit into the exchange to then move their money around to do interoperability as a service. As long as they keep their whole exchange liquid, they can get away with it. But that's what we've realized. You don't really have the opportunity for the little guys to capture some of that yield. So crowd liquidity for us is building these pools out to allow solvers to run without liquidity, but also allowing anyone to deposit into these pools so that they can earn intent yield, which I don't think exists today in the space. And then secondly, for people who have yield bearing stablecoins, we have the technology, and this is something we're still still announcing, so we can't share too much, but we've built the technologies working alongside these pools for you to also restake your yield bearing stablecoins to boost them. So if you have like a 4% AVE yield, you can just restake it into the pool and you can get anywhere from 4.1 to like 6% yield, just because we can take your liquidity and just in time use it if we need it and boost it. Otherwise, we can just keep it in the yield bearing as protocol that you were opted into.
Yeah, amazing. I think like the fact that it yeah, I think restaking is potentially the right verb there, although, that does have some connotation with like economic security, but that's a new construct, right? Which is you have this yield bearing coin and then as needed, it can be used as liquidity for solving such that it can be put to work even further. Pretty exciting. And so, you know, as you think about, like what the next 12 to 16 months hold, certainly we're going to see like likely many more stablecoin announcements, likely many more chain announcements. How are you thinking about things in the context of like EVM versus non-EVM, given this goal of global stablecoin interoperability?
Yeah, I mean, I think like it would be stupid for someone to just like stay in EVM and not be aware of like the work that's going on in all VM lands, right? So we just finished our audit for Solana. We're on track to release it end of
Amazing.
month, if everything goes well. So hopefully by the time you see this, we're already live on Solana. If not, I blame my engineers. But we're already looking at alt VMs. We think it's an inevitability, right? Like there's always going to be use cases that require maybe custom implementations of virtual machines that might mean that we have to accommodate them. Hypercore being a key example, Solana being another one. So the cool thing about Lit is the generic nature of it. Like it already supports a lot of signature types, and where it doesn't, you can kind of like have workarounds for that. So that just makes us really confident that our system is going to be future proof, that wherever we need Lit, we're going to have it. And I know I have to thank a lot to thank to your team for making sure you keep up with the chains and all VMs.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I think like, a lot of people, the status quo right now is the EVM is dominant, but with this kind of generalized signing network that we've built out, and that you clearly have like a deep and tacit understanding of. Um, if it turns out that like Google's Python chain that they had teased a couple months ago ends up being like, who knows? Maybe they run DoubleClick, like their AdSense through that chain. All of a sudden, that's the biggest stablecoin chain, like overnight. And we're definitely in a disruptive era where something like that is possible. I think like it's a hard time to hold on to the status quo and think, oh, it's going to be this way forever, especially as it relates to like the EVM dominance. And yeah, exciting that we've kind of got together this model around global stablecoin interoperability, which is build once, deploy anywhere, independent of chain type.
I also think like lit becomes like that, or as you said, like becomes that signing layer, which in fact allows you to be chain agnostic, right? Like lit can, with lit and lit actions, you could create a generic intent language that is uniform across VMs. And then you'd have the lit actions transpile that request into the relevant call based on the chain you're trying to do the execution on. So you can actually just take lit to its natural conclusion and say it becomes that signing layer, and it by effect, it also becomes like the compiler for the universal intent language you want to do any action on any VM chain.
I think that's the whole insight around the work that we've been up to, which is that like once you can articulate in a way that is immutable, but also upgradable, that has the same properties of smart contracts, but articulate how you want signing to work. That is the notion of a universal adapter. Obviously, we're talking about a universal adapter here in the context of stablecoins. Universal adapter is definitely a really nice way to explain the work that we've been up to at Lit Protocol. Is that the manner in which you talk about Lit? Like, you see, I'll give you a scenario. You see a friend, maybe they work in Web 2, and you haven't caught up with them in a while, and you're very excited to share your work. When it gets to the point of the conversation where you explain like how the interoperability across chains works, and which is to say how Lit Protocol works, how do you typically articulate that?
I say it's one step better than a server and one step below the security of a blockchain. So it's that middle layer that is always missing. And it's the way that I explain Lit is that it's the sidecar to your wallet. So it's just the thing that makes your wallet smarter. And so I always think of it as a companion. I think a lot of the narrative crafting you did around like agentic systems and like thinking of Lit PKPs as like that agentic cosigner basically allow like that kind of thing really excites me because yeah, we're talking about interoperability because right, that's what I'm working on right now. But if I plot out the next 5 years, what I'm most excited by is that intersection of AI and crypto. And I'm not talking about the buzzwords here, but like the practical application is, well, if you say like, how do AIs actually end up working? Like, how does finance become smart? You need these kind of you need some mechanism to be able to connect an LLM to a blockchain wallet. And honestly, I haven't seen anything better than Lit when I consider all the security, liveness, decentralization trade-offs.
Amazing. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think also the intersection with that with stable coins is like today, if you look across every wallet, most people who have stable coins sitting in their wallets most of the time, those stable coins aren't doing anything at all, right? There's no yield generation. So the user is not putting those to work. The wallet that is providing that service, they're not involved in any of the rev share. And like, that's the status quo, going back to what we were talking about at the start of the conversation, which is how do we get the non-custodial decentralized systems up to parity with the centralized and custody ones, which includes TradFi, right? Like the standard thing is you have stable dollars in your bank account with BOA or Case or whatever it might be. And those dollars are being put to work, and that's, generating your very, very small yield. And crypto, obviously, because of the speed of money, and there's more detail to get into here, you can generate higher yield on that. And so to me, that feels like one of the first and most obvious kind of agentic use cases, which is functionally just the smart savings account for stable coins inside of every wallet.
Yeah, I fully agree with you there. Like one of the things that we're getting deep into the research in Q1 of next year is that once we have crowd liquidity, we have like boosting technology that we can boost LP yields what we want to work on as a next eventual in conclusion, which is like the third vertical that we're obsessing about, which is what we call accounts. And accounts is basically this agentic, like as you're describing it, this agentic system for your stablecoin wallet, right? So one of the things, for example, one practical way, not to sound too buzzwordy, but one practical way to do this is, let's say you have funds on Aave Base, right? You're earning 4% on Aave Base, but Aave is also on Optimism, it's on Mainnet, it's on a bunch of other places. It's the same pool, just different yields. So what you could say is, I will check every day to see which has the higher yield and then do interoperability. Or you could say, I want a companion for my wallet that takes my Aave USD on Base, but I'll opt it in so that it automates it for me, so that if there's higher yield opportunities that come up, it is able to smartly take it out from Aave Base, convert it into USDC, use Eco's interop to transfer it to to Optimism, deposit into Aave, and switch my yield so I get the highest overall yield. So first, we're trying with boosting yield on the same chain, and then we're going to try boosting yield at the protocol level. So if protocols are multi-chain, we'll optimize for that and we'll move the money as it's needed. And I think that improves the yield for users, improves the UX because they don't have to manage all of this themselves. But it also improves the yield protocols themselves because now, as an entity, we are smartly allocating debt to the money that is being lent out, right? So because in aggregate, we become such a big entity, we can actually affect the lending rates for those protocols as well.
It's pretty exciting. And then, like, not to go to kind of futurism scope creepy, but like, then you can also even imagine, like, even then what happens next after that, somebody goes, oh, actually, I think I've discovered an amazing source of yield by myself. My Uber driver told me about it. Let me move all my assets over here. And because you have this sidecar in your wallet, maybe this omni-chain smart account, this eco account powered by Lit, however we want to articulate it, runs a simulation before executing that transaction and goes, hey, Alice, maybe this is a little dangerous, click here to double confirm. And yeah, everybody's just kind of out there on their own in crypto right now, both in the context of how can I generate the most amount of yield and also how can I stay safe? And it does seem like the obvious place for these, now that software can reason and perceive, the obvious place for that to plug in.
That is such an interesting idea, David. Like, we actually had someone who worked at Eco, Nishi, if you're watching, he actually worked at compliance. Like when we were at Neobank, he used to work at compliance and like on compliance and fraud and AML for like our app. And he had this idea where he was like, one of the biggest problems with fraud is the siloed data banks that you have to derive from to detect fraud. And so what you're just saying, if you take it to its natural conclusion, you could have a lit cosigner that you could just subscribe to that checks against an OFAC list, checks against like smart phishing links, checks against like this crowdsourced data source, which tells us all the scary, scammy things. And it just checks against them. And if so, it'll sign for you. And if not, it won't sign for you. And that cosigner can just act as a protection layer. And that is a natural benefit for everybody.
That's a really good idea. Basically like, fraud detection as a public good. Right now, the biggest version of that, like I'm assuming basically lives in Stripe's infrastructure, lives in Swift's infrastructure, things like that. Yeah.
Then you could go a step further. Let's go really far into the future and say, what if you could just then take smarter fraud detection technologies where the lit cosigner could also determine, like, if you're swiping, you're in France, but hey, the last time I checked, you were in Canada. Probably someone's trying to scam you, and I won't sign this. And so now you have all the 2FA protections and all of the things that you put at the app level, you could put it at the KMS level, which could be globally accessible regardless of the application you're using. And that's something very exciting to think about. I'll stop there, but like, lit is fun.
Yeah, no, that's pretty wild. I mean, because like if you played with any of like the crypto credit cards, right? Like whether it's the Coinbase one or some of these other ones, that's what it's doing. It's pulling from the key. It's pulling from the crypto balance and then doing the conversion as it sends it over into the fiat rails. And like from any assets that you have where you rank, these are the assets that I want. But yeah, there's really, right now that fraud detection is just on the fiat side and just on the traditional credit card side. So I think it's a huge opportunity. I also do, for what it's worth, I do think it's secondary to uh, first maximizing the yield and abstracting all of the chains and all of the assets, but then um, that element of moving safety closer to the core of where the assets are held feels like a very, very powerful second order type of product to work on.
100%. But I would almost say, like, for certain fintech app, it's actually first priority, because certain fintech apps, they can't even do it if they don't have a, like, some people ask us, like, is your solver OFAC compliant? Let's try to reason about how you can even do that, right? So as we get more institutionalized as a space, we're going to come up against the constraints that financial systems put on on traditional web TradFi. And so I think it's like all VMs, right? It's good to be aware of them, even if it's not a priority. Good to be aware, because when they come up, I fear most people are going to get caught with their pants down, because everybody's used to the Wild West in crypto and nobody wants to suit up, basically.
Well, as somebody who is, in the midst of suiting up, but also playing in the Wild West, you're sitting in an interesting balancing spot, and yeah, definitely pushing the frontier. So, where's the best place for either people to use the technologies that you've built or develop with them and follow the work?
Yeah, great segue. So there's a couple of places that I would love to share with all of you. The first one is, well, if you want all of these links in a single place, you can just go to eco.com. We have all the links there. There's docs.eco.com, which is basically our doc site that kind of talks about all of the technologies, the SDK that we've published. So everything, if you want to build on it, you should just look at our docs. And if you have any question, you can just tag us at Eco. We'll be sure to reach out and answer those questions. And then if you want to try it out and not build, but just try to see that and play with the technology, you can go to portal@eco.com. So that is portal, .eco.com. And yeah, you can just play out with this interoperability system that we've built, and we will be releasing the other things that we're building within that product as well. So keep your eyes peeled for crowd liquidity there within this quarter.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure, David. Like, lit is, I think someone said it to me, I think it was Will from Alchemy. He said, lit is basically working on the three of the hardest problems in crypto. I wish them good luck. And I think a lot of people in the space kind of are rooting for you, because the vision that you've tried to achieve is so ambitious. But we all know, if you are successful, not if, when you are successful with it, it's going to change the landscape of crypto. So we're happy to support you, happy to build with Lit, and yeah, happy for what's next.
Yeah,
to
it
come.
happens one day at a time. Like that's not just in the future; it's also today and also in the future. Amazing. That was really great.